Thanks for having me today. If we can corral the herd in here before we head out to the happy hour, appreciate it. I know a lot of y'all have been seeing me up here for a better part of 10 years now, and so you know that I always try to make it fun and try to bring some energy to our presentations. And we've got a lot of new material today, so I'm excited about that. But before we hit all the new fun videos and screenshots that I'm going to show you, I do want to start on a bit of a serious note. Yesterday, I had the honor of joining a lunch with the U.S. Energy Secretary in Houston, and she was real clear, and it's a big change from a week ago, she was real clear that the paramount value for the U.S. government today is the geopolitics of energy, the geopolitics of energy economics, really. And that happens once in a while in our lifetimes and in the last 120 years or so. But right now, it's happening right now. And it's clear that the ability of the U.S. public and our citizens and consumers and of Western Europe to sustain the Ukrainian war effort today is really dependent on the ability of the Permian Basin to produce crude oil. And that's us. Don't usually tear up at a Oilfield Water Conference, but it's the truth. And we know in this room, because we're here at an Oilfield Water Conference, and we've all been doing this a long time. We got some newcomers now, thanks to $120 oil, but most of us have been doing this for a while, that the ability of the Permian Basin to produce crude oil in support of that effort is totally dependent on our ability to manage the water that goes in and mostly comes out with that crude oil. And today that ability is threatened by the rise of seismicity. And so we have to find ways to adjust our practices and deal with that and solve that, not just for our own economic interests, but really for the interests of this country and for the brave people in Ukraine. And I'll say I have also a bit of a soft spot because I actually turned 21 in Odessa. And I know everyone's picking on Ben Warden. I'm sure Ben Warden's like, I turned 21 in Odessa, I turned 22 and 23 there too. No, I mean, I actually turned 21 in Odessa, Ukraine. Their Odessa, not our Odessa, although I think they're named after each other in some way. So I had quite an adventure there when I was turning 21, and I'm not going to thrill you guys with that right here today in our time, but for those of you who I see at dinner, you ask me about it, and maybe we've got a couple of stories to share. So with that, what I'm going to be talking about today is it's not your geologic fault, seismic response areas and the art of seismic self-defense. The agenda today is first I'm going to talk a little bit about what seismic response areas are for those who aren't familiar with them yet. Then we're going to look at the specific commercial impacts on the individual companies that have been most affected by the seismic restrictions that have gone into place. And then the last part, we're going to talk about what we can do about that, both the ways to alleviate those problems and those risks, and also some real opportunities that emerge for those of us who are in the water business because of what's going on. So first of all, what's shaking? Well, for those of you who haven't heard yet or haven't felt it yet, 3.0 magnitude earthquakes since 2018 in West Texas have increased by about 9,000%. They've gone from about 2 to about 176. 2.0 magnitude earthquakes have gone out by about 1,500%. They've gone from about 100 in 2017 to about 1,800 in 2021. Those are huge increases. And what you're seeing on the screen right now is where those happened during that time period. And you can see on the bottom graph, the counts have really shot up in the second half of these last 4 years. There's a real clear trend there. So the Railroad Commission's responded to this by creating seismic response areas, and there's three main ones. There's the North Culberson Reeves, NCR, which you see here, and shown inside are where there were 3.0 plus magnitude earthquakes around Texas in that time period and in New Mexico. We've got the Gardendale one, which was the first one around Midland and Odessa. We've got Stanton, which is the newest, a little bit northeast of Midland. And then there's a number of them being created in New Mexico. We're going to focus on the Texas side today. But before we do that, just a quick breakdown of the rules. I'm not going to read all these. You can look at them later when we distribute it. But I think the really important point about the distinction between the Texas rules and the New Mexico rules is that the Railroad Commission is specifically investigating and then designating seismic response areas. For the New Mexico Oil Conservation Division, what they've done is they've created a set of kind of preemptive rules that are automatically triggered if either more than one 2.5 magnitude earthquake happens in an area, or one or more 3.0 magnitude earthquakes. Everyone within a 10-mile radius of those triggering events is automatically affected within 24 hours. That's really important because it means if you own a disposal in New Mexico, you need to be constantly on top of what's happening seismically in a 10-mile radius of your asset, because the obligation is on you, not on them, to respond if there's a triggering event within 10 miles. So we know at this point that water injection can interact with fault lines to create seismicity. And there are lots of potential causes of seismicity, which we'll talk about a little bit. It's not just saltwater disposal. There's also EOR, hydraulic fracturing, certain kinds of mining activities, depletion of fluids up through oil and gas wells, and also natural seismic activity. There are lots of reasons. But in this case, what we're really focused on is seismic activity that to some extent has been linked with saltwater disposal. And so the first thing you have to know is, where are those fault lines, right? Well, it turns out there's not like one or two big fault lines in the Permian Basin. There are over 3,000 fault lines in the Permian Basin. They are all over the place. It's not, when most people think of fault lines outside of this industry, they think of the Superman movie, right, where Lex Luthor shoots the missile to California, is going to nail the San Andreas Fault, right, and then all of California is going to slide into the ocean. He's going to own a lot of oceanfront property. It's going to be really valuable, right? That's his grand plan, that Superman stops and makes the earth roll backwards. There's not one big fault where if it cracks, we all slide off. There are thousands of faults. And so the first thing is, we have, at Sourcenergy, tried to map every known fault. And so we've mapped over 3,000 fault lines in the Permian Basin in 3D so that you can plan ahead and understand where they are, right? And try not to just place your disposal right on top of one of those. We also know that the Texas Seismic Response Areas received over 400 million barrels of H2O in 2020. Now, we're going to talk about 2020 numbers here because 2020 is the most recent year that has complete reporting. We have a lot of 2021 at this point, but there's about a 12-month lag, up to a 12-month lag on reporting of disposal volumes. So that's a lot of water. And another key fact to understand is a lot of times producers don't actually know where their water goes. You know, a lot of it they do, but the fact is some goes on trucks or goes on pipelines that's routed around in different places. There were water management plans made years and years ago. And so a lot of times producers don't even know what their exposure is to water going into seismic response areas. In fact, when we looked at the Gardendale area, we found that more than half of the water going into Gardendale disposal wells came from producing leases that are outside of the actual Gardendale borders. Now, how are we addressing this in the short run? You've seen some about this today. There's a few approaches that the industry is taking. One is to try to get permits for more shallow wells because it's the deep disposals that in some places tend to be more associated with the bigger seismic events. But to be clear, shallow disposals also can be associated with seismic events. They don't tend to be as big, but they definitely happen. And in certain areas, it is the shallow fault lines that have the higher fault slip potential and are more sensitive. So shallows are not a clear solution. But more importantly, there's a reason why we've been drilling all of these deep disposals and not the shallow ones, right? I mean, the deep disposals cost 4 or 5 times more to build than a shallow disposal well. Why would anybody ever do that if they had a choice? Well, there's a reason. It's because particularly in the Midland Basin, but all over the Permian, the shallow injection formations have been getting filled up and overpressured for years, in some cases decades and decades. And so when you keep trying to pump that water into an overpressured formation, you can water out other people's wells, you water out the reservoirs, and it's really, really hard to drill through when you're trying to drill new wells. So there's a reason why we started building deep disposals, and we're not going to solve this problem just with lots and lots of shallow recompletions of the existing deep ones. You have to know how much cumulative ejection there has been in every stratum under there. The other way that we're trying to address this, of course, is by moving water other places, right? And at this point, you'll see on there, Sourcenergy has mapped over 10,000 miles of water pipelines in the Permian Basin. I'm not aware of any other extensive map like that because you can't get those pipelines from the Railroad Commission. They don't get reported on a regulatory basis. And those are being utilized in a lot of cases to figure out how we can move water out of inside the SRAs to outside the SRAs. And in some cases, companies may be resorting to going back to pre-2014 and using trucks to get their water out of the area too. But then you have to consider, are the SRAs going to follow the water, right? How far out of that SRA do you have to move that water without kind of dragging the SRA problems with you? Because it's caused by the cumulative injection of the water, and if you start injecting somewhere else, you're probably going to see some motion in that activity too. So that's not a perfect solution either. Plus, there's definitely an overall capacity shortage of long distance throughput for water pipelines out of these SRAs. And then, of course, the solution that everybody loves and that everybody wants to do and that we're talking about all the time today, which is some of this water can be recycled into new fracs, right? Everybody wants to do that. We're getting up to a level where, closing in on 50% of the water maybe going into new fracs could be recycled water. We may get to 100%. Almost. There's some technical reasons why we can't do 100%, but we can get to like 98%. And this is everybody's dream, and we'll get there because there's really no reason to use more than a couple drops of fresh water in any frac. We got plenty of salt water to go around, and we've learned over the last 10 years of recycling that salt water actually works better. So there's every reason to use it. We should be only using recycled water in our new fracs. Problem is, even if we recycle every single drop that we can into new fracs and never use another drop of groundwater, fresh or brackish in a new frac, best estimates I've seen are that we can take away maybe 20% of the total produced water flow. We've still got something like 80% of the produced water that's got to find a home somewhere else, almost certainly in disposal. I should mention something about the screen that we've got up there right now. What are we looking at right there? So what you're seeing on that screen, in addition to the Gardendale SRA and the SRA wells, which are the black dots, you're seeing the near real-time locations of every frac crew operating in the Permian Basin. We're showing you where every frac crew is, and not just which operator they work for, but which service company they work for within a day or two of when they are on that location. Why am I showing that on this slide? By the way, most of you have never heard that before, but there's some pamphlets on your desks there. Why are we showing that? Because if you want to be able to recycle every drop of water you can possibly recycle, then you have to know where all the frac crews are and who they're working for, because that tells you where the opportunity is, either to bring at the end of their jobs, bring their water over to your job to recycle it, or where as you get to the end of your job, you've got an opportunity to sell your flowback water for recycling in their jobs. But to do that, you have to know where all the frac crews are today. And as you heard from some of the other companies earlier today, the best available reporting from regulatory sources on frac locations is Frac Focus, which is a nonprofit that doesn't really enforce the collection of that. There actually is no reporting of frac completions to the Railroad Commission. There's no form for that. So you have to go to the nonprofit in Oklahoma City, which, hey, they do their best, but those frac reports can be a year or more late, and a lot of them never show up at all. So if you want to be able to act on recycling opportunities in real time when everybody's frac schedules are changing all the time, you have to know where the frac crews are today. And as far as I know, we're the only ones who are able to show you that. So will all these methods that we're talking about be enough? The world needs Permian crude right now. We know water's the biggest input and output of the unconventional upstream process. Water management is often the largest production cost, sometimes the majority production cost. We've got that 4-to-1 water to oil ratio in the Permian and the Delaware. Sometimes it's more like 8-to-1. And one of the key facts to understand is crude production flows, right? We produce the crude and we send it somewhere, and now it's gone. but the water all stays here, right? So yeah, every million barrels per day of crude that we add to the Permian Basin flow that's coming out of the ground, we're adding a stock of like 1.5 billion barrels of water into the ground that year, and it stays there. And seismicity is responsive to cumulative injection in the formation, right? It doesn't just go away. These are physical pores that fill with fluid and then they're full, and you have to push it further. Sometimes that hits a fault line. So is seismicity the speed limit on Permian production?